Thanks.
A question first, perhaps, for the United Nations. Mr. O'Brien, I'm over here to your right, slightly centre. I am interested, of course, in any final pledging numbers that you might have had, if you could add that in. But I'd like to know a little about the challenges. You've spoken of the challenges of. It's one thing to bring money, but another thing to get to people on the ground. If you could just lay out a couple of those for me. And the other question I would ask to everyone in general, the UN Secretary General this morning said he was confident that the UN Security Council would take its responsibilities on this chemical attack, and of course that has overshadowed your meeting today. What makes any of you confident that they will do that? This hasn't happened before. This is possibly the third chemical attack this month.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We'll be able to give you the numbers towards the end of the day when there will be another opportunity. But it does give me certainly this chance before you to thank the very strong unity of all the states that have been represented today, the 70 or so that the High Representative mentioned, who've come together in unity and as a representative of the United Nations, very much articulating the values of how we can come together as global citizens to support the suffering of people in need wherever that arises. So I do want to, first of all, pay tribute to the very serious and continuing commitment of so many governments who have been, on behalf of their peoples, pledging their commitments and their solidarity with the continuing suffering. And of course we have had in mind very much the horror of the effects on people of chemicals as a result of the attack and the explosive action that took place around chemicals at Khan Sheikhoun near Idlib. Clearly, as you have heard, taking the second part of your question first, the condemnation that the use or even the possession of chemicals for the purposes of weaponry and the use against other fellow human beings is itself something which not only is morally abhorrent, but is contrary to all the laws and treaties which are signed by the international community. So, quite rightly, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is a UN investigative body, is immediately tasked with now getting to an investigation. Until we establish the facts, then it's more difficult to give you the comments. So let's establish those facts through that proper channel. But I think the confidence that was expressed by, above all, the Secretary General, but of course I think is true of everybody else, is that it's from those facts that we will need to make sure there is a proper holding of accountability for anybody who has perpetrated what amounts to such an atrocious act against fellow global citizens. In relation to the challenges faced, of course, whether it's for people within Syria or the many Syrians who have fled across the border, the 5 million or so, to neighbouring countries, and paying respect very much at this conference to the support of host communities within those neighbouring countries and raising funds to support them as well. But within Syria, there is an agreed humanitarian response plan where we now want to put into action effectively what the money enables us to buy with the cash are programs that save lives and protect civilians in conflict. And that plan, which has been agreed, took a lot of getting there, is now something we can use as a blueprint flexibly, so we always respond to the immediacy of needs on the ground, but with the NGOs and local CSOs, above all with local Syrian people, supported by the international community and international NGOs and others, we have a real ability now to be able to implement the life-saving that we have continued to do. In the end, the best antidote to suffering is peace, and peace requires a political process. That is what will bring the humanitarian suffering most quickly to an end. In the meantime, we are doing everything we can. But the real challenges, whether I was to show you another graph showing one length is for food, another shorter length is for whether it's logistics or nutrition, so clearly everything has a very great detail, but the big issue is access, and you hear the reports every month to the Security Council to tell you where we are making progress with access, which has been a slightly bit better over the past few weeks compared to what was some really raw times over the turn of the year, when we had some months where we only had one or none going in. And it's that access which is now the key. Now we've raised the resources.
Nawab.
Nawab Khan from the Kuwait News Agency. And my question is directed to His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Kuwait. Sir, can you give us some information on the assistance and humanitarian aid which Kuwait till now has provided to the neighboring countries of Syria? Thank you.
شكرا.
Thank you very much indeed.
منذ انطلاق المؤتمر الأول للمانحين في الكويت
Since the first
يعني
pledging conference
الكويت أخذت على عاتقها تخفيف المعاناة
that was held in Kuwait,
الشعب السوري مع المجتمع الدولي.
Kuwait shouldered its responsibility towards the international community and above all towards the Syrian people.
مؤتمر المانحين الأول والأخير.
We were hoping
عام 2013.
to see that the only pledging conference needed for the crisis would be that of Kuwait in 2013, but unfortunately today we have been obliged to organize many other pledging conferences, and we reached the fifth one. This protracted crisis has spilled over neighboring countries, and many United Nations reports draw our attention on our urgent need to access swiftly the beneficiaries within Syria, and also to extend assistance and help to those neighboring countries who took the responsibility to host a great number of refugees, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, namely. So, with or along this humanitarian assistance, we need also a development program in order to upgrade the capacities of those neighboring countries, infrastructure-wise, electricity, energy, roads, etc. And we need to work on the political track in order to allow the Syrian people to sit around the negotiation table and provide for stability, enduring stability. So these were the main topics that we have been able to talk about this morning. Thank you.
Philip.
Philip Loet, Norwegian Broadcasting. One question for State Secretary Boris Johnson, and the second one for Norwegian Foreign Minister Børge BRENDE and the High Representative. First, Mr. Johnson, what is your reaction to the Russian explanation that the factory in Idlib, that it was Syrian plane that bombed ammunition factory producing chemical ammunition or chemical weapons? And for Mr. BRENDE and the High Representative, if Raqqa falls, it will not necessarily fall into the hands of Assad. And how will this play into the international cooperation to try to solve and make any political progress and find a route to any peace in Syria?
Well, let me say first of all, just in answer to an earlier question, which was how the UN might react to what has taken place, and whether the UN would accept its responsibilities and condemn this attack. I think the reason why the UN has to do so, and why all countries have to do so, is because we are all legally committed. If you may remember that in 1925 the world came together under the Geneva Protocol to ban the use of asphyxiating and poisonous gases and all comparable materials in warfare. It's been a part of international law for almost a century. And as things stand, and I accept that different stories are being put out, as you say, and we cannot be certain about what has taken place. But all the evidence that I have seen points to the responsibility of the Assad regime for that horrific attack in which children were killed. And so, in my view, by the way, that shows the impossibility of that regime continuing to be part of the government of Syria, and why it's absolutely vital that, as the High Representative has said, if we are to get on with the reconstruction of Syria, there must be a transition away from the Assad regime. But more urgently, we in the UK, together with our French friends, have called an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. We've tabled a resolution, which I hope absolutely everybody feels able to sign up to, because all we are saying is that there should be condemnation of that chemical weapons attack, and secondly, that there should be a thorough and urgent international investigation. And I don't think anybody could possibly, reasonably, oppose such a resolution in all conscience. And I hope, therefore, that all the countries of the UN Security Council will support it.
Daniel.
I think there was
Sorry, I'm very sorry.
no problem. It was not an easy question, so we can go to the next one, but I think it is an important one. It is about also the future of Syria. Let me just say that after 6 years of war, we have now seen a middle-income country turn into a humanitarian catastrophe. It is the worst crisis, humanitarian-wise, we have seen since the Second World War. And now we are seeing also all the rules that we agreed after the Second World War to protect us against this kind of atrocities, and international law, humanitarian law, is being broken in the 21st century, so close also to where the Second World War started. There is no compliance with those standards. It's very sad, and it also calls on all of us to do our utmost to find a political solution for peace. Yesterday we were reminded about use of chemical weapons. OPCW has to now investigate this, and those that are responsible have to be held accountable, and this is war crime, using chemical weapons that are also forbidden. So on the Raqqa side and the eastern part of Syria, the fight against ISIL through the anti-ISIL coalition with more than 60 countries participating is moving forward, and moving faster forward than we thought just months ago. What is important to bear in mind is that this area around Raqqa is a Sunni Arab tribe area, 3.5 million, 4 million Sunni tribes. And when this area is freed, of course, these people that belong to this area have also to run this area. This is crucial, and the coalition needs to work out a really comprehensive plan to make sure that this is also the result of the freeing from ISIL.
Just one word on this, because as Børge rightly mentioned, there's a military strategy of the coalition, anti-Daesh coalition. We discussed this just a few weeks ago in Washington. There's, together with it, humanitarian component. And I would like to stress one unequivocal principle, that as we underline that reconstruction and support to the reconstruction from the international community is linked to the beginning of a political transition, humanitarian assistance and help is always unconditional and goes to every human being in need. But then there's a political component, and there is not going to be any military strategy that can substitute a true political solution. And this is going to be true all over Syria, because what we heard today from the Syrian friends that addressed our ministerial meeting today with powerful words, what is needed is a political situation in the country, a governance in the country that will allow each and every Syrian to feel home in Syria. Unless this happens, there will be no sustainable peace and no sustainable social, human reconstruction of the country far before the economic one. So I think this is clear. We have three components of the work to be done: the military one against Daesh, the military efforts to bring the Hudna, the ceasefire, into place for real, and the humanitarian and the political work. These are all components of the same work. And today, even in very difficult conditions, I believe, we witnessed a moment of serious, frank, but constructive and unified purpose, more than I expected. I hope and I believe, I expect, as we say in diplomatic terms, that the consistency of all the actors at the table will be proven in the coming hours on all these different elements: the military dynamics on the ground, the humanitarian delivery, and the political efforts.
Daniel, now.
Daniel Brosler, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Question for the German Foreign Minister Gabriel. If I may, I'm here. To what degree, would you say, Minister, is Russia co-responsible for the latest chemical attack? And do you see any options, any chances for the international community to put pressure on Russia? And we hear here that the responsible will be held accountable. How optimistic are you that this is really going to happen, taking into account the Russian record? And a question related to that, if I may, also to the British Foreign Secretary. The American president said that actually President Obama was co-responsible for what happened now because he drew a red line that he did not enforce then. What is your view on this? Is there truth to that? Thank you.
Wenn Sie mir gestatten, antworte ich auf Deutsch.
If I may, I'd like to respond in German. On your last question, well, the American elections have been decided, and we need to look forward, think of the future of the world. And America should commit itself very firmly. The elections are over, so... And then on the first question, I assume that the UN investigation will clarify who is responsible for this, and it also needs to be clear that the use of chemical weapons is a serious war crime. It's barbarism, and those responsible need to be called to account. And to what extent Russia is responsible on that point, well, Russia is responsible for clarifying matters, clarifying the situation as soon as possible, and making sure, doing everything in its power to set underway the political process, so that we can't say at the end of the day that Assad can pursue the civil war or do away with people, kill people, as he sees fit. And just thinking about the recent declaration from the US administration, the fight against terrorism needs to be to the fore, at the center of things, the political process to put an end to the civil war, to bring about reconciliation, have fair elections in Syria. So what people in Geneva are trying to do, we need to keep that firmly in mind. And I would firmly support the High Representative, what she said. If you want to solve the problems in Syria, you need to look at the whole range of issues. Obviously, the fight against terrorism, against Daesh, is something that brings us together. But in parallel with that, we have the political process we need to pursue, we need to move forward with. We need to pay equal attention to that. And I think that Russia has major responsibility there, but also Saudi Arabia, the UN, Iran, and we Europeans want to move forward with this. We want to support the process. And then humanitarian aid, providing that for people in this catastrophic situation. That's another major issue. And also stabilizing the neighboring countries. And Germany at the conference said that in 2016 in London we said 1.3 billion euros for humanitarian aid and also for stabilizing Jordan,
Lebanon
Lebanon, Turkey,
and
for this year and the coming year, we've pledged the same sum,
1,1 bis 1,3 Milliarden
Euro 1.1 to
zusätzlich zu dem, was wir bereits
1.3
2016 zur Verfügung
billion
gestellt haben.
over and above what we made available in 2016. And I'd just like to repeat what I said at the conference.
Die Nachbarländer
The neighboring
haben ja
countries,
nicht nur Gewaltiges geleistet,
they haven't
Libanon,
just
Jordanien,
done
auch
great
die Türkei.
things, Lebanon,
Bei
Jordan,
der Aufnahme
Turkey,
von Flüchtlingen
taking
manchmal
in refugees.
schäme ich mich
And
dafür, wie die
sometimes
europäische
I'm
Debatte
ashamed
ist.
looking at the
Ein
European
Land wie
debate going on.
Libanon oder
You
Jordanien,
have
die haben
countries like Lebanon, Jordan,
weit weniger Einwohner
and they
als
have
die
far
Bundesrepublik
fewer
Deutschland,
inhabitants than
10%
Germany,
davon,
at
noch weniger,
10%, even
und
less.
nehmen eine so
And
unglaublich
they've
große Zahl
taken
an
in
Flüchtlingen
an
auf. Und es
unbelievable
sind
number of
vergleichsweise
refugees.
arme Länder,
And
gemessen
they're
an dem Reichtum
relatively
Europas.
poor countries measured
Angesichts
against
der
European
Bereitschaft
standards.
Europas, Flüchtlinge
And looking at the
aufzunehmen, oder
willingness
der
of
Bereitschaft,
Europe to take
kann
in
man sich eigentlich
refugees,
nur bedanken, bei diesen Ländern das zu tun.
I think
Und
that
ich finde,
we can
Europa
only
hat auch
thank
Grund, sich dafür
those
zu schämen, wie
countries.
wenig wir
And I
dafür
think that we should be
Nicht Deutschland,
ashamed.
nicht Österreich, nicht Schweden, einige wenige Länder, aber Europa
Sweden,
insgesamt.
Austria, Germany,
Aber wir müssen
but
auch
also
sehen, dass die Länder selber
the whole of
natürlich
Europe.
Länder sind, bei denen wir aufpassen müssen, dass es
And we have to be careful
nicht zu
with these
immer
countries
größer werdenden Konkurrenzen
as
zwischen
well.
der
We shouldn't have
einheimischen
a
Bevölkerung,
growing
Arbeitsplätzen,
competition between
Wohnungen,
the indigenous population for
Spitäler und anderem kommt
schools,
mit den
places in
Flüchtlingen
schools, jobs and
Und
so on,
deswegen dient
and the
natürlich auch ein
refugees.
Teil der Mittel, die wir zur Verfügung
So
stellen,
some
auch
of the
der
funds that we
Stabilisierung
make
der
available
wirtschaftlichen
should
Entwicklung,
serve
der
to
Bildung,
stabilize the
Entwicklung dieser
situation in
Länder.
those
Das,
neighboring
glaube ich, ist
countries,
auch von
the
großer
education
Bedeutung.
system,
Aber
etc.
all
That's
das
also
wird
very
nicht
important.
ausreichend sein,
But that won't be enough
wenn wir
either.
nicht parallel dazu
If in parallel
neben
with
einem
that,
echten Waffenstillstand,
alongside
dafür
a
tragen
true
Länder wie
ceasefire,
Russland und
and
andere, auch der Iran,
Russia
eine
and
große
Iran
Verantwortung,
that bear a major
nicht auch einen
responsibility
politischen
there.
Prozess in Gang
At the
setzen,
same
wie
time,
er
we
in
need to have a
Genf
political
leider
process
noch nicht
along the
ausreichend
lines
fortgesetzt.
of what
Am Ende
Geneva
des
has
Tages
been
darf
trying
es
to
mit
bring
dem
about.
Blick auf den
Insufficient
Kampf gegen
progress
den
has been made
Terrorismus
so far.
keine stillschweigende Kumpanei mit dem Regime geben.
And we
Das
can't
darf nicht der Fall
just
sein und
sit
deswegen
back and let
unterstützen
the
wir sehr
Assad regime
das, was die
get on
Vereinten
with it.
Nationen
So
mit
we
großer Mühe
support what the
versuchen,
UN has been trying to
politischen
do.
Prozess in
It's
Genf
made a huge effort
aufrechtzuerhalten
in
oder in Gang zu
Geneva.
bekommen.
We want to maintain that
I'm
process.
afraid it's going to be the last question, so I give it to Lawrence. I'm sorry again.
Sorry, I
You have
think
to answer.
our German. I'll be. I agree very much with what Sigmar just had to say, but very, very quickly, of course, you're right in the sense that we made a historic decision, the UK and the United States back in 2013, not to respond to the crossing of the red line that everybody remembers, the use of gas at Ghouta. That, I'm afraid, vacated the field in Syria, as everybody knows, and we're living today with the consequences. I'm afraid the people of Syria are living today with the consequences of that decision. What we can do now is to support the humanitarian relief effort, as Sigmar has said, support the neighboring countries who are bearing the brunt of the crisis, as he rightly says, doing everything we can to keep the ceasefire, have a proper ceasefire, support the de Mistura process in Geneva, and use our leverage to make it clear that there can be no budget, there can be no European checkbook, no financing of Syria without a transition away from the Assad regime, as Federica has said. And finally, I again repeat my call. Of course, we must wait and see exactly what happened near Idlib, but it is up to all members of the UN Security Council to condemn that chemical weapons attack, and we look forward to seeing them do that today.
Lawrence.
Thanks a lot. Lawrence Norman of the Wall Street Journal. Just a question back on the numbers. Mr. O'Brien, you said you can't give final numbers, but we've heard various donations announced. I count around $3 billion so far. Can you give us a sense of whether we'll end up much higher, just a rough sense of where we'll be? And a question for Mr. Johnson. You're calling for the ouster of the Assad regime. Isn't that a futile hope now that the Trump administration is not calling for the ouster of Mr. Assad?
Just on the question of numbers, and I think it really is just very important to give all those who haven't yet had a chance to contribute around the very large table the chance to make their views and their commitments known. So what I think is probably most helpful at this stage, and recognising that what we're seeking to do is to raise the funds that will support the coordinated appeals for both the humanitarian and looking forward to the resilience programs, and not just for Syrians who continue to be in Syria in such great need, but also those in the neighbouring countries who you've heard about, as well as host communities who need continuing support. So you'll be well aware that the overall number last year at the very successful and strategic London Syria conference was that we ended up with about $6 billion of pledges for that 2016 immediate needs requirement, and about $6.1 billion for the 2017 to 2020 period, which covers the more resilience type investment in the future and the hope of Syrians who, as you've heard from all those along this table, have continued to bear such an enormous brunt of the various political and military failures. And so what is, I think, encouraging, but I'm not giving you a number, but what's encouraging is that of that $6 billion that was pledged for 2016, in the end, the nation states coming together cashed more than the pledges. So we ended up with $6.4 billion. That is why we were able, during the course of 2016, through these coordinated humanitarian responses, we were able genuinely to be able to continue to serve millions of people. Roughly per month, 5 million people in Syria were receiving life-saving support and assistance, and were being given protection services. So that is, I hope, encouraging. It is, of course, split between the humanitarian response plan and what we call the 3RP, which is the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plan. And so I hope that, very much recognising that the humanitarian track, as the High Representative so rightly said, is an unconditional, absolute requirement to meet need wherever it is, whoever it is, impartially, neutrally, and independently in the name of humanity. At the same time, by doing that, we are giving a better context by which both the political track and the aspiration and determination of everybody coming together to try and drive the chance of peace. And also to persuade all those who can give us access to meet needs, is given a better chance. And that's why whatever, even as we enter the 7th year of need, whatever the very serious hurdles that are presented to us, we as humanitarians will never be deterred, and we will remain totally determined to meet need and to do our best to create a context by which peace can best be achieved. But there will be, I know, numbers to be given to you later in the day, which is the essence of your question.
Very quickly. Objectively, I simply don't see how Bashar al-Assad can remain in charge after what he has already done. Of the 400,000 people who are estimated to have been killed in Syria, he is responsible for the vast majority of that butcher's bill. And you have to go a long way back in history to find a tyrant who has stayed in office in such circumstances.
Thank you very much. With this, we're closing the press conference. I would like to thank you all for being there. Thank you.
Just 1 second, just to remind you all on the numbers, but also on the co-chair's declaration. We will release it exactly at the end of the conference day. So there you will have the final common pledge, but also the resume somehow of the co-chair's declaration, getting the inputs of the interventions today. Thank you.